This week on Mutuality Matters.
And so I think even I think the issue of the buy one get one free concept of ministry, I think was an unintentional consequence of necessity, but that we never looked at and said, perhaps this is not a good idea.
Sure.
Perhaps this is not a good idea. And as church staffs developed, and as we began to think about the youth pastor being something else other than a parent who steps in to volunteer, but that youth ministry is actually a ministry position, that we didn't ask ourselves what that looked like from a gendered perspective.
Mm.
And so I think I want to be as fair as possible to say that I don't think there was an intention of reducing a woman's role in many of those spaces. But now that we know, and now that we've examined these things, we have to do better, and we're not.
Yeah.
We're just asking those questions.
Thanks for joining us this week, and welcome to Mutuality Matters, a podcast hosted by CBE International. Let's get into this week's episode.
Hello and welcome to the Mutuality Matters podcast. My name is Todd Korpi.
And I am Tara Korpi.
And you have joined us for the headship theme, where we focus on what mutuality looks like in church, the home, and the world. We are joined for this episode by Dr. Joy Qualls, who is a dear friend of ours that we go way back online. We were just talking before before we started recording that we've actually probably been connected on social media for 12, 13 years or so, probably longer than any of us care to admit. But this is the first face-to-face interaction that we've had, which I think is just proof, by the way, Joy, that friendships can grow in digital environments, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Joy is an associate professor of communication studies, as well as an associate dean in the Division of Communication at Biola University. She is a prolific author and speaker who speaks frequently on effective communication, leadership, and from my personal vantage point is just a stellar voice on the subject of empowering women and with men and women leading together in leadership spaces. She is the author of a great book called "God Forgive Us for Being Women," which, Joy, I don't know if you know this, but I read your dissertation version of this.
Oh,
Before
great.
I read the actual book itself, like in 2013 or some long time ago. So I'm excited to be able to dig into to talk about the book and the research that you've done. Joy is also a contributor to several publications, including the Assemblies of God's Influence magazine, The Table, and Biola Magazine. Joy, welcome to Mutuality Matters.
Well, thank you so much for having me. What a gift to be here. I think Todd, you and my grandpa are the only two people who read the whole dissertation. So
That's fair. Oh, well, I am kind of a senior citizen at heart. So kind of there's just an NPR loving kind of like one of my points of passion is actually nerding out to A Prairie Home Companion on NPR.
yes,
Which
yes.
So, anyway.
Old soul.
So Joy, on that note, let's move on. So, Joy, your book, God Forgive Us for Being Women, obviously came out of a lengthy research process, as doctoral studies often do. But it focuses specifically on kind of this Pentecostal tradition that the three of us all came of age and have spent a good majority of our life within. But it focuses on how within that tradition, which as many of our listeners may or may not know, has been ordaining women for well over a century. I think the Assemblies of God was actually ordaining women before women had the right to vote in the United States. And so, but your book focuses on how that Pentecostal tradition can empower and limit women in their leadership roles. And one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on this episode was selfishly to be able to have a chance to actually talk and to kind of nerd out about women in ministry and all that stuff. But also to kind of talk from this perspective of this tradition in which we all have, the three of us have come from, and a lot of our listeners have come from, being in an egalitarian tradition, but this isn't limited to Pentecostalism. It has broad application for any of us who are part of Christian movements that empower women. So let's kick it off with this question. Can you explain kind of the key tensions or I'm sorry, can you share what initially drew you to explore this topic and how your own experiences ended up shaping your research?
Sure. Yeah, the topic itself actually came out of my own sort of faith journey and struggle. We didn't call it deconstruction back in the day, and I don't know that I would even reference it that way now, except to say that I had grown up in this tradition. I'm a fourth generation AG kid. I'm not just a Pentecostal. I'm a fourth generation AG girl, and I was trying to figure out who I was and what I believed and whether or not this was a space that I could stay in, because I wasn't, I'd been told all the stories, but I didn't see that playing out in the churches and the spaces that I was inhabiting. And I was wrestling with the dissertation topic and had some of these conversations with my mentors. And I had a dissertation director who said to me, you need to tell the stories of these women. If you don't, they will haunt you in the holiest way possible for the rest of your life. And the irony is, he was a Reformed person who
Wow.
didn't believe in women in ministry and didn't believe in egalitarianism, but he knew that there was a not only a study to be had, but the narratives of these pioneering women who didn't have a clear path. I think that's the myth. The myth is that there was this golden age of women in ministry, and if we could just somehow get back to this golden age, and what I discovered is that there was this freedom and constraint, freedom and constraint, freedom and constraint all throughout our journey, and we're still wrestling with that. And as a Pentecostal fellowship, we don't have an authority structure in the Assemblies of God by which to dictate, this is what we believe, and you must carry these things out. And so that's an additional layer of tension. So it really was about me figuring out who I am and what I believe. And I think in a lot of ways, I can say today, almost 20 years later, that it was God clarifying my own call. That I didn't know at the time was going to be ministry focused.
That makes sense. So you're talking a little bit about the contradictions that we feel in Pentecostalism, right? We're so empowering of women, but then there's also limitations for women that we can feel in different spaces. There are some churches that can be even a part of the same denomination and say we believe that women can do whatever, but also a woman can't be alone with a man, you know? So let's kind of talk about that a little bit. So what do you feel like are some of the key tensions that contribute to these contradictions?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about in the book is that movements in particular is as long as the movement is still in the prophetic phase, where it's about revival, it's about the move of God's Spirit, there is a freedom there that is almost unexplainable. But once a movement starts to move into institutionalization, when they start to form bylaws and doctrines and structures, there seems to be these outside forces, history, tradition, other denominational viewpoints that begin to ask some hard questions that when the movement is in its prophetic phase, either those questions don't seem important enough or we're able to process them in a different way. And some of that had to do, in our tradition in particular, with the fact that we are a revivalist movement. And so many of our early founding folks, while they couldn't deny the outpouring of the Spirit on men, on women, on people of color, on the poor, on children, on the rich, on whoever it happened to be, they could not let go of their prior denominational structures when they were trying to navigate and negotiate. How do we organize? How do we prevent false teaching? How do we, so we have to acknowledge that some of those constraints are just constraints that come from the fact that we are a body of people who have been formed out of other traditions.
Yeah.
We're it's All Saints Day today, so we're celebrating the Reformation and that tradition, these Protestants, right? So we're a tradition that comes out of the protests.
Yeah.
but as the protest moves from that place to institutionalization, there's a whole lot of that history and prior structure that we just can't seem to get away from.
That's such a good observation, because there is something, and I think that there's a level in which we all embody this, that we can have, a dramatic experience in the case of early Pentecostalism, these early revivals like Azusa and others, that radically kind of change our worldview. But then there's this muscle memory within our worldview that causes us to default to certain paradigms or schema when necessary or when needed to be called upon. So, I think about that when, Tara and I were first in ministry. I grew up in a very empowering, home. My dad was very supportive of my mom and her teaching and all of that kind of stuff. But when it came time for us to get married, I remember, there were early on in our marriage, there were just assumptions that kind of my muscle memory brought me back to of, well, this is the wife cleans and all of that kind of stuff, that what created discussion points early on in our relationship.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And it ended up requiring us to renegotiate those sorts of things. I want to kind of pivot a little bit from some of the questions that we had come prepared to respond to something that I saw on X or Twitter that you had shared that I thought was just really interesting. There was a mutual that we both follow that had shared something about, as he's talking with different pastor couples or that there was this dynamic where when there was this expectation placed on the pastor's wife to kind of be like a free hire, he almost exclusively was like, his next question was, oh, was it, and would name, a specific Pentecostal denomination. And what is it? Because I see that when you shared that, I was like, oh my gosh, like that's a lived reality, but also, one that I've seen many times over, where you have kind of this freedom of, hey, women, you can do anything in ministry, but if your husband's on staff, you're going to have to do it for free. Can you kind of talk about some of that, especially in those early days, where pastors' wives function in a very kind of pastoral role, but maybe didn't have, like you said, we kind of think back on those early Pentecostal years as like a golden age when it was not necessarily that.
No. I think so I'm really excited to have Beth Allison Barr's new book on becoming the pastor's wife come out, because I think she's going to be able to sort of show us a trajectory that even most of us haven't thought through on how the role of the pastor's wife replaced the woman in ministry. I'm anxious to see how she makes that argument. But for us in our tradition, I think, a lot of the things that developed as traditions for us are not theological. They're very practical. We're a very pragmatic group of people. And we've always been the kids on the other side of the tracks. Pentecostals were the poor. Pentecostals were the working class. They were not the high church, highly educated, seminary trained people. And so I think a lot of this is not a demeaning of women or the role of women in these spaces as secondary. I think they were just practical. We have a budget to pay one person a salary. I think about the church I grew up in Northwest North Dakota, where the pastor was the pastor, the janitor, the lawn care person, the PR person, marketing person, the accountant. They were all of those things because there was no such thing as church staffs. There was no such thing as hierarchies. And so the wife's role in the church was to fill in the gaps of positions where there wasn't pay to be had. So the wife played the piano, the wife led the choir, the wife did the Sunday school, those sorts of things. I want to be as respectful as possible to say, I think there was a pragmatic, practical reason for these things back in the day, but I'm not entirely sure we thought through the implications of those things. And so I think the challenge is that culturally, we just can't quite wrap our mind around the notion that a woman could lead in a space without her husband also being in that space, because isn't the husband supposed to be the provider, the worker, the leader, and those sorts of things. And so I think some of those things are more cultural than they are theological. We see studies about women in the workplace all the time, that women are they do the workplace housework, and they do their jobs. They also do the home housework, because we've been so enculturated with this notion that men do this and women do this. And so I think even I think the issue of the buy one get one free concept of ministry, I think was an unintentional consequence of necessity, but that we never looked at and said, perhaps this is not a good idea.
Sure.
Perhaps this is not a good idea. And as church staffs developed, and as we began to think about the youth pastor being something else other than a parent who steps in to volunteer, but that youth ministry is actually a ministry position, that we didn't ask ourselves what that looked like from a gendered perspective. And so I think I want to be as fair as possible to say that I don't think there was an intention of reducing a woman's role in many of those spaces. But now that we know, and now that we've examined these things, we have to do better, and we're not. We're just asking those questions.
Mutuality Matters podcast, along with thousands of CBE's other resources and content, is available for free on CBE's website, which is possible because of donor support. Together, we can spread the message that God calls women and men of all cultures, races, and classes to share authority equally in service and in leadership in the home, church, and world. Give today at cbe.today/donate.
When I saw our friend post that, first of all, I knew exactly who he was talking about. But I thought, this is something I need to do better in the space that I inhabit, to ask questions of our leadership, to advocate in the spaces I inhabit, because this is still a problem that we don't talk enough about.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about the women that are maybe they feel that call to ministry, and they are being kind of pushed into that role, or the women that feel a calling into ministry and they're the only woman on their staff, and they don't really have anybody to look to. They don't have an example. I have been so blessed to have women that are active and in ministry pour into my life.
Right.
I know for a fact, because they've talked about it, they didn't have that. So they felt like they were kind of alone in the whole journey, which is why they felt it was so important to pour into the women that were coming under them, and saying, like, you can do this too. How do you, or what advice, I guess I would rather say, would you give to women that either are feeling pushed into that buy one, get one free environment, or the ones that don't have anybody to look to? What advice would you say to those women?
Yeah. Get online and find us, because we'll walk through this with you. I mean, I know there's not always someone present for people, but the one thing I would say is that there are mentors, there are people who have gone before, there are people who are walking this journey with you, who will connect with you and who will walk you through this. It's very real. I mean, I hear from women all the time saying, I don't even know how to navigate or negotiate this. And so my response has been to try to engage in more education, so that I'm working with pastors directly to say, you have to think about some of these things. But I do think, I mean, even in the Assemblies of God, we've made efforts to develop the network of women ministers, so that there are now offices. This is where affirmative action is so beautiful, because George Wood made the determination, our former general superintendent, to appoint women to positions and then hold elections. And as a result of that, there is now a network of women ministers office in every district in the Assemblies of God, that are elected positions. So not just at the national level, but now at the district level. which is different than women's ministry. The women's ministry is ministry to women. This is the ministry of women to the broader church. And so I would say to them, you might not know anybody personally right now, but if you would reach out to the network of women ministers or whoever is your credentialed women's rep, call me, connect with me. I will find somebody in your district. I think you have to be bold and brave to do those things. And then I think from there, we have discussions about a workman is worth his wages. And we don't, if a couple is coming into your church, that's fine, but we need 2 separate job descriptions. And if you've got to split that salary in half, to make it work, everybody needs a paycheck, because it's about just the additional funds, but it's about the acknowledgement that the work that is being done. I'm a college professor in my day job. Nobody expects my husband to show up to the classes I teach.
Right.
Nobody expects my husband to come to the evening discussion events. Maybe sometimes he does, but there's not an expectation that he's a part of that. But we've created a culture in the church that the spouse, whoever that is because female pastors who are in paid positions also experience this. Well, where's your husband? Why isn't he district counsel? Well, because he doesn't want to go on the shopping trip with the
right. Exactly. Exactly.
So gendered everything about,
Right.
the mental golfing. I'm determined. I'm on sabbatical in the spring. I'm going to take golf lessons as part of my sabbatical in the spring.
Nice.
I will never be at a district council again where I cannot be out on the golf course, because I it's not a prove I can do it kind of thing, but as much to say, if this is where the business is being done,
if
this is where the discussions are going to be had, I am going to be out there, and I'm going to know what I'm doing when I'm out there, because I want to be an example to women in those positions. So I think we have to be advocates for, we need to demonstrate a paycheck for the work that people do. And whatever that looks like, if it's just housing allowance or whatever it happens to be, we need to acknowledge the work that's being done, so that we are showing that this work matters, that it's valued, and that it's not an expectation that the spouse, whoever that is, does anything for free.
That's so good. So good.
And I think that's where, I think recognizing how God works over the span of multiple generations. And I'm one that I tend to think that, on a broad level, different generations have kind of different callings on them. And I think that one, as elder millennials, that our generation has an opportunity. We're kind of a disruptive, very prophetic, and kind of will blow up systems, or whatever, in the name of toppling Asherah poles, or whatever you want to call it. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of pain involved in that, as you both well know.
Right.
But I think there's also a lot of opportunity of our people in our generation, especially as we're aging into positions of senior leadership within the church, to just simply say no. To say, just be upfront, because not only is that just unfair, it's actually it's illegal. In the United States, this is just downright illegal.
That's right.
And I think at some point we just have to have the intestinal fortitude to say, no, that's not going to happen.
And I think because we experienced this early on in ministry as well, where I wasn't paid, but I was expected to be at everything and to do everything and to be, in meetings. And I remember he was confronted about it and said, "Where is your wife? Why isn't she here? She needs to be here." And he stood up for me on my behalf. And so I think there is something to be said of the spouse, fighting on their spouse's behalf as well. So, I think that's so important. And that's part of that egalitarian relationship, is fighting for one another as well.
Well, that's just, Kevin and I did not set out to be people in an upside down relationship in terms of cultural standards about things. But he actually, my husband actually was a youth pastor when we got married, and in part lost that job because I wouldn't quit my PhD program to join him in his part-time youth pastor role.
Wow.
where he was working full-time hours and not making a full-time salary. And I was like, you people have all lost your minds, you know?
Yeah.
And he even said to the board at that point, like, I was hired before we ever even got engaged. The notion that there would be a expectation that this person would just stop everything that she's doing and that God called her to do, so that she could, I don't know, bake cookies for the youth group on Wednesday night just doesn't compute with even what any other workplace environment would be like, right?
Yeah.
And so then when the season came in our life where he felt the call of God, my husband was in social services and ministry positions for most of his early career, but he felt the call of God to step away from those things and stay home with our kids. It was not a so out there concept for us that our roles were based on where our skills and talents were. And again, some of those pragmatic things, right? It wasn't just that I was called to this greater thing. It's that I had the job that had the health insurance. And so if one of us was going to stay home, it made more sense for him to stay home, because of the nature of his work. The Lord has redeemed all of that. And I mean, he's living his best life in his dream job now, but it took 10 years of being able to die to himself and die to the expectations of the world and die to the expectations of the church. I can't tell you how many times I had even well-meaning people in our fellowship say to me, you know, you're so good to honor your husband and the work that he does. But, you know, a lot of people are chattering behind the scenes of like, what's wrong? Like, what? And I'm like, what's wrong? And I said, I hope your response to them is, this is what God has asked him to do, and he's walking in obedience. And guess what? That's what leadership looks like.
Yeah.
My husband's the greatest leader I've ever known, because he died to himself and he died to expectations to do the thing that God asked him to do. What a greater example of Christ-likeness. I was never that person, you know, in the sense of like, if God had come to me and said, I want you to quit your job and stay home, we'd have had a long conversation about that. And here was the example of this amazing man who was willing to do this. And I just happened to benefit from it because I was the wife who got to live that existence.
Well, and what a beautiful example, as a sidebar, of what biblical masculinity actually is.
100%.
That it's not wearing camo or not wearing camo, or enjoying this sport or not enjoying that sport, or fulfilling some sort of cultural and time-bound expectation, but of discerning where God is speaking, what God is leading to, and then coming into alignment with that. You know?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to the church, right? Looking forward at what the future of the church looks like. What do you think is the most crucial thing that needs to change within Pentecostalism and even other evangelical communities to fully embrace true egalitarian leadership?
Sure. Well, I think so. Let me speak to our tradition to begin with, and I think it's going to take education at the local level. So again, we're not a denomination by which Doug Clay, our general superintendent, can issue an edict from on high, and everybody has to follow that, like the Pope or something. And so as a result of that, the cultures of churches, the structures of churches are very different from place to place and locality to locality. You could have two AG churches next to each other, and they're going to run very differently than one another. So we need to focus on education at the local level of boards and congregations and pastors, to educate on what we actually believe. I think the challenge is not a pushback against what we believe. I would be willing to bet that most church boards in small town America and even urban centers in America don't actually know that our position on women is in our Constitution and bylaws. It's not just a white paper that's out there. And I think that has to happen. And then I think in the broader evangelical tradition, I do think there are some structures that need to be burned down in order to, so I'm a Gen Xer. I was raised on hose water and neglect. So, it's
that needs to go in your Twitter bio.
But I'm also an Enneagram 8, and I'm an institutionalist who I believe in the family, I believe in the church, I believe in government, I believe in those things. But I also know that institutions can become corrupted, and institutions are only as strong as the people who exist in those structures. And I think maintaining an institution where people are being actively harmed, hand me the match, right? But in the meantime, because I think what comes out of that is revival again, right? Like I think I'm ready for the next revivalist movement. But I think in the meantime, we have to just keep in conversation with our evangelical brothers and sisters. I'm here at Biola University that the university itself does not have a theology of gender. Our seminary does, which affords me a lot of freedom in the work that I do, but it also creates some tensions amongst our students who are trying to navigate some of these things. Would it be easier to be in a place that affirms everything that I believe and nobody has difficult disagreements and things like that? Perhaps, maybe it would. But I think the greatest gift God ever did was call me to Biola and ask me to be who he created me to be, to study the things that I'm supposed to study and navigate these things in relationship with my brothers and sisters who we differ on these things, but at the end of the day, we love Jesus, we believe in the cause of Christ, and we want the advancement of the gospel to be our primary objective. And so we're willing to live in that tension with one another so that we can exemplify what unity in the body of Christ looks like. And so my Southern Baptist friends may never believe in the ordination of women, but I want to be able to be in relationship with them so that they cannot deny that the Spirit of God and the call of God is evident in my life, whatever that looks like. And I want them to be uncomfortable, and I want to be uncomfortable so that we can continue to navigate this together. This is not about being a winner, right? This is about maintaining relationship. Now, that said, I would also say to sisters and brothers who believe in women's ordination and believe in women's leadership, you also have to exercise those beliefs with your feet, and so if you cannot stay in that space in order to navigate how change gets made, then we've got plenty of room over here. Come on over. There are plenty of spaces where you will be welcome and we'll walk this journey together. And that's a discernment process that you've got to figure out, with the Lord and your family and things of that nature.
So good.
So good. Yeah. All right. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. I feel like we could make this like a four episode continuation, just continue talking about this. But Joy, where can people follow you and follow your work?
Yeah, so I love, if you listen to Annie Downs at all, she always says she's embarrassingly easy to find. And so I like to think I am too. So my college nickname as a debater was Madam Speaker. So you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Madam Speaker, all _one word. And on Facebook at Joy Andrick Qualls. And my website is joyqualls.com.
Awesome. And don't forget to pick up a copy of God Forgive Us for Being Women on Amazon, on Wipf and Stock's website, or anywhere books are sold. Joy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. It's been a privilege to have this conversation. And thank you for being a part of this week's episode of the Mutuality Matters podcast. Until next time, I'm Todd Korpi.
And I'm Tara.
And we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Please stay tuned to all of our episodes that are coming to you from our incredible team of co-hosts. And in the meantime, go to our show notes where we're going to be listing some related resources and the way that you can be in touch with our guests if you have more questions or just want to reach out to them. You can also find links to organizations, books, and resources. Our website, cbeinternational.org, has the largest collection of egalitarian content. Come, check it out and watch videos and listen to our audio of past conferences and events. You can subscribe to our blog, magazine, and academic journal, or visit our online bookstore, which contains talented authors and subjects that will enrich your faith and equip you to use your God-given talents in leadership. Make sure to follow CBE on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and subscribe to CBE's YouTube channel and listen to audio lectures on SoundCloud. I'm Todd Korpi, today with my host Tara Korpi, and we would like to thank our support tech and the team at CBE International that makes this podcast possible. We are Mutuality Matters. Thanks for listening.